Cheers, guys. Epix911. Welcome to the first VR vlog / podcast style episode. Don't really have a name for this series yet. I'm going to have to come up with one. If you've got an idea for a name, let me know in the comments below. You know what the kind of existing naming convention is. I've got the VR Roundup series, which is what the daily news show has evolved into. There's the quick looks for games, apps, which is, as the name implies, a quick look at a game or app to let the viewer decide if they want to bother with it or maybe dig into it a bit more. And then, of course, VR A to Z, which is the history of VR, tutorials, basically a catch-all for the rest of it. This would be more emphasis on kind of riffing, not really, being a polished or highly edited program. So if you can think of a name, let me know, guys. I was thinking about topics for this first one. And one of the things that comes up time and again is taking an older game and giving it the VR treatment. And the reason for that is I've been impressed with past efforts. One that got me a lot of criticism and, quite a few kind of verbal jousts is me saying I enjoy Doom 3 BFG VR, which was a fan-made, we're talking about a 1-2 person show. I found that more immersive than Doom VFR. The criticism was from a lot of people, what are you talking about? The graphics are way better in Doom VFR. I'm not arguing graphics. But what I have said in the past, and I maintain, graphics are not the end be all. What's far more important to me is immersion, presence, pacing of an experience. And I think the strength that Doom 3 BFG VR for me has over VFR is its pacing. And that's as a result of its natural gameplay. Doom 3 BFG is a more deliberately slower paced experience than VFR. Most of the encounters that you come across in Doom 3 BFG are 1-2 enemy style encounters, right? After periods of inactivity in terms of fighting, but tension buildup. So you've got dark, claustrophobic corridors and single fight experiences along the way. It's all about tension, fear, claustrophobia, whereas VFR is more of a gong show in terms of let's throw 5 enemies after you in quick succession. And that can work in VR, but I don't think it works as well right now with the state of how VR is as Doom 3 BFG works. So, yeah. So, following that same logic, it got me to thinking, what types of games are out there in non-VR? And I've had this, for example, one of the viewers, Chris Brower, him and I have talked at length about this. What older games would you like to see get the VR treatment? So I took a look, just went to my PS3, PS2 collection and picked out a few titles that I thought might potentially be fantastic VR games. So let's take a look at a couple of these. The first one, Shadow of the Colossus. This is a PlayStation 2 title. I got the greatest hits copy here. First played this at Exity, my buddy Exity's house. Shadow of the Colossus, if you're not familiar with the title, most of you probably are, so I'll just do a real quick 101 on it. Imagine a game where you've got to do a lot of grindy stuff, and at the end of all that grindy stuff, you have a boss battle. And you're probably thinking, Epix, you freaking moron, that's 90% of the games on the market. Exactly. What Shadow of the Colossus does is it says, forget all that grindy crap that happens in between boss encounters. Let's just make a game that's boss encounters and make those boss encounters as epic as possible. So yeah, you're riding from location to location, but the emphasis, the focus of Shadow of the Colossus is on the boss fights. A first-person version of this in VR, I think, would be absolutely fantastic. Some of the fights have you literally going up the body of a colossus that is, 20 stories tall, looking for figuratively, and sometimes it's literally the Achilles heel on their heel. Other times it's the figurative Achilles heel. Maybe it's a weak spot at the base of the neck. Well, you got to get up there, and while the enemy is, launching attacks at you, hit that weak spot and ultimately take the creature down. So Shadow of Colossus, I think, would be fantastic. The Souls, it all started with Demon Souls. Of course, Knight's Field is the games before that. But this was the one after a long break that wanted to test the waters to see if that gameplay style, but a more refined version of it, would work. Obviously, it was a resounding success because we got the 3 Dark Souls games. We got Bloodborne right after it. Don't need to really get into this, but I think that as well would be fantastic for VR. I'm going to change my mind on that one. God of War, very much like Dark Souls in the sense that the epic encounters get the focus, but there are some parts along the way. There's lots of smaller encounters. Again, though, I think if done correctly in VR, again, you'd have a gem. And then Soul Calibur 4. I prefer Soul Calibur 3, but I don't have that game because my backwards compatible PlayStation 3, well, it screws up on it. So why do I think Soul Calibur, or this could apply to any fighting game, it could be Street Fighter, but a first-person version of that. And it's because, and I've talked about this before, but not for a while, in those games, there's specific hitboxes, right? Or bounding boxes on an enemy. And what I mean by that is, in Street Fighter 2, you've got 2 combatants, right? Each of those has a weak spot, and there's a small rectangular portion of the sprite or the polygon that you need to connect with your character, either through a special attack or a body part to inflict damage. Sometimes that damage causes them to fall prone. Sometimes it forces them to fall backwards, etc., right? In virtual reality, we have the potential to have super complicated bounding boxes, hitboxes. In other words, as fluid as your motion is in real life, we could make that fighting game. It's something I don't think we've really tapped into with VR yet, but we're going to get there. We're going to see it. We're going to see sword duels, guys, that are hyper realistic in VR, that you can't possibly do in a non-VR game because it's just not that dynamic. It's not that fluid. VR, it's going to excel. So yeah, I'd love to see a Soul Calibur style game, but done in virtual reality. So let me know, guys, are there games that you can think of? It doesn't have to be console. I just cherry-picked some console games. Like I said, in the other part of the man cave there, I've got all my PS3 and PS2 and PS4, 3DS games all kind of lined up. It was easy to just go and say, oh yeah, that would be good. That would be good. Let me know. It can be PC games as well. Next thing I wanted to talk about is the Vive higher resolution. That was a story that I touched on in VR Roundup. And to me, it kind of ties into what I talked about earlier too, that we shouldn't be in a huge rush, in my opinion, to go to higher resolutions when we haven't really optimized 1080p. And we all know that. We see that because you can play virtual reality games. Perfect example, and I'm trying to think what the name is, and I should have prepped on this, but when you riff, you don't have that luxury all the time. There was a zombie fighting game. It was very cartoony for the Vive and the Rift on Steam. It doesn't matter. The point is, it was cartoony, and the textures as a result weren't that in-depth, but the advantage of that is they could really take advantage of the resolution of 1080p and be super crisp. The other side of that coin is you've got games that have more complex textures, but because you have the higher performance requirements of VR, they have to sacrifice, and they generally either, they'll use cheat techniques like blurring or foveated rendering to be able to maintain performance, to kind of keep at that magical 90 hertz and not have to get into reprojection territory. My argument would be address that first. Let's focus. We're not in a rush, right? We want quality over quantity. get performance where you need it to be. We're going to get to 4K. We're going to get to 8K. It's going to happen. Why are we in a freaking rush, right? Stuff is going to evolve. But while we do that, let's streamline. Let's ensure that we can get the most performance-wise out of each resolution, each generation of tech before we dive into the next one. That's really the main argument there, because now it's coming out that what they're looking at is possibly emulating Samsung's Odyssey. So we've got the current lens, which is 1080 by 1200. It's a pair of those in the Vive and the Rift. The Samsung Odyssey is using 1440 by 1600. So here you've got all those extra pixels that need to be rendered every cycle, just like before. Without those optimizations, well, all those old issues, reprojection and slowdowns, are going to be that much quicker to rear their head. So that's the main thing there. Let me know your thoughts, guys. But my feelings are, let's not rush it. We have a first gen right now. Let's make that first gen the best that it can be before we go into the next one. We're not going to stop progress. That's ongoing. But we can ensure it's at least the best quality before it moves on to its next iteration. Next thing I want to talk about is Sony and the PlayStation VR. And what I love about that, and I've touted this game, right? My second favorite VR game all time is a PlayStation VR title. It's not even room scale. You can play it standing, but it's perfectly playable seated and as immersive, in my opinion, and I'm going to defend that, as immersive as a room scale experience, because the programming is tight, the experience, the pacing, everything's nigh on perfect in virtual reality. So Sony PlayStation announcing there's now 2 million PlayStation VRs out there, and they've sold about 12.5 million PlayStation VR titles. What they hope for 2018 is to double that. So essentially, 250,000 virtual reality titles by the end of 2018. So next year, holiday season, we should have seen some pretty damn impressive titles. And I think developers are realizing on the PlayStation VR, this is console devs, right? They have the potential now with 2 million out there and an arguably higher attach rate for quality games, as evidenced by this title, right? If we look at the attach rate of how many people played this that own PlayStation VR, we've got a hungry virtual reality consumer willing to buy quality PlayStation VR titles when they're delivered. And devs understand that, they know that, and they want to tap into that. And a pretty healthy market. Here we are, it's been just a little over a year, because we've got to remember, PlayStation VR launched fall of 2016. Doesn't have the head start that the Vive and the Rift had. So here we are, January 2018. We're only talking about 15 months on the market to hit 2 million units. You look at a lot of other technologies. You can look at the iPhone, the original one, etc. Those are not bad numbers at all. So yeah, I can't wait to see how things are going to look a year from now. We're going to do that as usual when I do my kind of wrap-up videos for the year. It's going to be a pretty damn telling year, 2018. Can't wait. Which is what I want to talk about next. And I touched on this, I think, on a VR roundup. And I know some people probably think I lost my mind on this because we haven't heard a lot about it. Xbox. Simply that I strongly believe, and this is weird talking about Microsoft because I can be pretty negative when it comes to Microsoft, but let's look at the facts. The Xbox One, in its original incarnation or the Scorpio incarnation, at its heart is a Windows 10 operating system device, right? Hardware that has its own kind of slightly customized version. I wouldn't say highly, because it retains a lot of Windows 10's core operating system. Microsoft has invested pretty heavily as evidenced by a, half a dozen vendor alliance into mixed reality VR. They've really kind of gone gung-ho for that. They're doing their augmented reality via the HoloLens. They've put out this fall creators update. They've laid the foundation. I simply can't believe that they're not going to have their console tap in on that when they see how their competitor Sony is doing with virtual reality. 2 million units, wanting to hit 25 million VR titles by the end of 2018. They want some of that action. So my gut tells me, and this is pure speculation, guys, half the fun of these vlogs and podcasts is to be able to speculate like this, that come E3, and I'm either going to look like an idiot or a savant, right? Idiot savant, we can go with that. Come E3 if this turns out to be correct. But I do strongly believe Microsoft is going to announce virtual reality for the Xbox One this E3. I do. Every instinct I have is screaming it's going to happen. And the reason for the delay, I think, is them realizing, and I'm trying to think if I talked about this on a VR roundup or if it was fodder that was going to be for a vlog. So forgive me if I've treaded on the same ground before, guys, but being first, not that important. And a perfect example of that is SNES versus Genesis, okay? The Sega Genesis, their 16-bit console follow-up to the Master System, had almost a full 2-year head start to the Super Nintendo, right? Their 16-bit follow-up to the Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicom. And yet, ultimately, Nintendo would go on to sell 20 million more copies. So if you're looking for precedent set, right? You don't have to look far than the history of consoles themselves to see being first doesn't really matter much, right? If you're willing to learn that. Of course, everybody wants to be first to get those initial sales. But if you're interested in the long game, and Microsoft has had so many failures, think about it. Look at their tablet history. Look at everything else. They've had some good ideas. I think the Surface tablet, having a PC and tablet forum to play Steam games on is genius. And yet they haven't been historically successful as they could have / should have been. So take all of that. I refuse to believe in everything Microsoft is a blundering idiot. I think in this example, they are being calculated. They know that being first isn't important, but having the best solution is. So again, E3, they will announce, and I think what they're going to do, and again, pure speculation, is announce not just VR for the Xbox One, but a wireless solution. There, I said it. I don't think I said that on a VR roundup. I may have, but yeah, that to me is their announcement for E3, a wireless virtual reality add-on for the Xbox One. Let me know what you guys think. Have I lost my mind? Epics, you're just wandering into a wilderness of idiocy. Fair enough, but all instincts scream to that. And then the last thing I want to talk about, guys, is wireless itself, okay? And it kind of segues the whole Microsoft thing into wireless. And why I think wireless is going to be such an important component of the next generation of VR. Right now, wireless is kind of all over the place. And most tech for consoles and PCs kind of starts life like that, right? There's no real standards established. People are testing the waters. There's competing standards. You don't have to look further than the whole Blu-ray and HD DVD to understand, or beta versus VHS. History's littered with examples, right? Of failed standards, some of them, many of them superior to the ones that they lost out to. It's no different for wireless. So how the landscape kind of looks right now is companies are approaching wireless in generally one of two ways, okay? The bandwidth or via compression. So with TPcast, we've got 60 gigahertz, which is more of a line of sight bandwidth, right? It's very fast. It can move a hell of a lot of data, but it needs to be line of sight. Soon as there's no line of sight, it suffers. Compared to, say, 5 gigahertz, right? Which is your kind of standard wireless network topography technology. It can't relay as much data, but it doesn't have to be point to point. It can throw that signal through objects. So that's one way to tackle it for wireless. The other way is through compression. Compressing the data when you send it. If you can compress and uncompress or decompress that data quickly enough, you can make up for a lot of the bandwidth problems, right? You can address the bandwidth issue through compression if it's done correctly. So you've got TPcast. Other solution is Amimon. They're 5 gigahertz. They're out for the Rift or the Vive. You've got Immersive Robotics. They're focusing on compression, 90 to 95% compression, just using standard wireless. So your 2-point and your 5 gigahertz. You've got NG Codec that's using both. We haven't heard a lot about NG Codec, but I think ultimately the company that's going to succeed is one that relies on both. Personally, I think 60 gigahertz has too many weaknesses. And if you look at how TPcast has handled it, everything's at the top, right? You've got the broadcast station. When there's things that block the view, and I've talked to a lot of people who have that solution, the end result can be poor. They're willing to deal with all of that because it's so liberating just not being tethered, right? But ultimately, once people get used to that, they're going to demand that the wireless experience obviously is higher quality. And I think to get there, it can't strictly just be line of sight. It's going to have to be, look, there might be obstacles, but to remedy that, like the NG Codec company, we're going to use a combination of both compression and a non-line of sight wireless bandwidth. So that's kind of my guess. And I think, we're going to find out eventually, but Vive 2.0, Rift 2.0, PlayStation VR 2.0, I can't see them doing a second gen strictly based on higher resolution. I think wireless, because of TPcast's success, or however you want to look at it, is part and parcel of that second generation. And I also think the best solution ultimately is going to be one that uses both. So, wow. It's been pretty fun, guys. I haven't riffed like this for a hell of a long time. Like I said, the old shows, this is what I did. It was 5 to 25 minutes of very rough editing, start, finish, right? I would just kind of trim both ends and leave everything in the middle. And I'm going to do that for this one. So let me know if you got questions. Let me know what you thought of this in terms of the vlog/podcast, what you'd like to see me maybe cover in the future. What I'm going to try to do is a combination of news, current events, and topical stuff that I think is relevant, right? Like the wireless we talked about today and some of the other topics. Guys, that's it for the first edition of, again, don't know what the hell I'm going to call it, VR vlog/podcast. As always, cheers, guys.